Let's take a look at selection test reliability. Reliability is a selection tool's first requirement and refers to its consistency. A reliable test is one that yields consistent scores when a person takes two alternate forms of the test or when he or she takes the same test on two or more different occasions. If a person scores 90 on an intelligence test on Monday and 130 when retested on Tuesday, you probably wouldn't have much faith in the test. You can measure reliability in several ways. One is to administer a test to a group one day, re-administer the same test several days later to the same group, and then correlate the scores called test-retest reliability estimates. Or you could administer a test and then administer what experts believe to be an equivalent test later. This would be an equivalent or alternate from an estimate. Or compare the test taker's answers to certain questions on the test with their answers to a separate set of questions on the same test aimed at measuring the same thing. This is an internal comparison estimate. Many things cause a test to be unreliable. These include physical conditions, differences in the test taker, or test administration. Or the questions may do a poor job of sampling the material. Because measuring reliability generally involves comparing two measures that assess the same thing, it's typical to judge a test's reliability in terms of a reliability coefficient. This basically shows the degree to which the two measures are correlated. Reliability, while indispensable, tells you only that the test is measuring something consistently. Validity tells whether the test is measuring what you think it's supposed to be. Test validity answers the question, does this test measure what it's supposed to measure? Put another way, it refers to the correctness of the inferences that we can make based on the test. A test is a sample of a person's behavior, but some tests are more clearly representative of the behavior being sampled than others. There are several ways you can demonstrate a test's validity. Criterion validity involves demonstrating statistically a relationship between scores on a selection procedure and the job performance of a sample of workers. For example, it means demonstrated that those who do well on the test also do well on the job and vice versa. The test has validity to the extent that people with higher test scores perform better on the job. In psychological measurement, a predictor is the measurement, in this case the test score, that you're trying to relate to a criterion, such as performance on the job. The term criterion validity reflects that terminology. Content validity is a demonstration that the content of a selection procedure is representative of important aspects of performance on the job. The basic procedure here is to identify job tasks that are critical to performance and then randomly select a sample of those tasks to test. Construct validity means demonstrating that a selection procedure measures a construct, an abstract idea such as a moral or honesty, and that construct is important for successful job performance. At best, invalid tests are a waste of time. At worst, they're discriminatory. In any case, tests rarely predict performance with 100% accuracy. Don't make tests your only selection tool. Use others like interviews and background checks to round out your selection process. Most employers know they shouldn't be biased tests in the selection process. For example, a particular IQ test may provide a valid measure of cognitive ability for middle-class whites, but not the same for minorities, if the score depends on familiarity with certain aspects of middle-class culture. For many years, many industrial psychologists believed that they were adequately controlling test bias, but experts have questioned that reality. Employers should ensure that the tests they're using aren't producing biased decisions. Knowing a test predicts performance isn't always useful. For example, if it's going to cost the employer $1,000 per applicant for a test and hundreds of applicants must be tested, the cost of the test may exceed the benefit. Answering the question, does it pay to use the test, requires utility analysis. Utility analysis shows the degree to which the use of a selection measure improves the quality of individuals selected over what would have happened if the measure had not been used. The information required for utility analysis generally includes the validity of the selection measure, applicants' average test scores, cost of testing the applicant, and the number of applicants tested and selected. You'll also need a measure of job performance in dollars. About 80% of the biggest US employers now use some sort of testing. Tests are not just for low-level workers. In general, as work demands increase in terms of skill requirements, training, and pay, employers tend to rely more on selection testing. And employers don't use tests just to find good employees, but to screen out bad ones. By way of example, in retail, employers apprehend about 1 out of every 28 workers for stealing. Cognitive tests include general reasoning ability of the specific mental ability of an individual. Intelligence or IQ tests are tests of general intellectual ability. They measure not a single trait, but rather a range of abilities, including memory, vocabulary, verbal fluency, and numerical ability. An adult's IQ score is a derived score. It reflects the extent to which the person is above or below the average adult's intelligence score. There are also measures of specific mental abilities, such as deductive reasoning, verbal comprehension, memory, and numerical ability. Psychologists often call such tests aptitude tests, since they purport to measure aptitude. You might want to measure motor abilities, such as manual dexterity or reaction time. By way of example, the Crawford Small Parts Dexterity Test measures the speed and accuracy of simple judgment as well as the speed of finger, hand, and arm movement. Tests of physical abilities may also be required in the selection process. These include static strength, dynamic strength, coordination, and stamina, to name a few. A person's cognitive and physical abilities alone seldom explain their job performance. Personality tests measure basic aspects of an applicant's personality. Industrial psychologists often focus on the big 5 personality dimensions of extroversion, emotional stability or neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. Some personality tests are projective. The psychologist presents an ambiguous stimulus, like an ink blot, and the person supposedly projects into the ambiguous picture their attitudes, such as insecurity. Other projective techniques include the Make a Picture Story or MAPS and the Forer Structured Sentence Completion Test. Other personality tests are self-reported. Applicants fill them out. For example, the Disc Profile Learning Instrument enables the user to gain insight into their behavioral style. Personality test results do often correlate with job performance. Achievement tests measures what someone has learned. Most of the tests you take in school are achievement tests. They measure your job knowledge in areas like economics, marketing, or human resources. Achievement tests are also popular at work. In addition to being quicker and less expensive to administer, computerized tests have other benefits. Analytics refers to using tools like statistical techniques to examine data in order to draw cause and effect conclusions from that data. Talent analytics means using such techniques to let employers search through their employee data to identify patterns and correlations that show what types of people or processes succeed or fail. Machine learning basically refers to software that can improve its own performance and learn on its own. Machine learning software learns to associate the characteristics of an input, like loan applications, with responses, like who defaults on loans. Finally, these and other tools are building blocks for artificial intelligence systems. Artificial intelligence means using technology to carry out tasks in a way we would consider smart. The work sampling technique tries to predict job performance through samples of job tasks. Work sampling has its advantages. It measures actual job tasks, so it's harder to fake answers. The work sample's content, the actual tasks the person must perform, is not as likely to be unfair to minorities as might a personality test that possibly emphasizes middle class concepts and values. Work sampling doesn't delve into the applicant's personality, so there's little chance of applicants viewing it as an invasion of privacy. Designed properly, work samples also exhibit better validity than do other tests designed to predict performance. The basic procedure is to select a sample of several tasks crucial to performing the job, and then to test applicants on them. An observer monitors performance on each task and indicates on a checklist how well the applicant performs. The applicant performs the task and the observer checks off the score for the approach used. Situational judgment tests are personnel tests designed to assess an applicant's judgment. Many organizations use these tests in one of the early stages of the recruitment process. Situational judgment tests present candidates with a range of different situations that they might experience in the job for which they're applying. For each situation, a number of possible actions are suggested. It's the candidate's job to choose between these possible options and judge which is the most effective course of action to take and therefore which action they would take if faced with the situation. The situations and scenarios in these questions should be related to the job. A management assessment center is a simulation of realistic management tasks. The candidates are assessed as they complete reports, memos, notes of incoming phone calls, emails, and other materials collected in the actual or computerized in-basket of a simulated job they're about to start. In a team application, trainers give a leaderless group a discussion question and tell members to arrive at a group decision. They then evaluate each group member's interpersonal skills, acceptance by the group, leadership ability, and individual influence. Participants solve realistic problems as members of simulated organizations competing in a marketplace in management games. Oral presentations occur when trainers evaluate each participant's communication skills and persuasiveness. These may include tests of personality, mental ability interests, and achievements. Most require an interview with a trainer to assess interests, past performance, and motivation. Supervisor recommendations usually play a big role in choosing center participants. Line managers usually act as assessors and arrive at their ratings through consensus. Assessment centers are expensive to develop, take longer than conventional tests, require managers acting as assessors, and often require psychologists. However, studies suggest that they're worth it. One recent study, in fact, found that assessment centers were superior to any other method of selection. Situational tests require examinees to respond to situations representative of a job. Work sampling and some assessment center tasks, such as in-baskets, are situational, as are miniature job training. Video-based simulation presents the candidate with several online video situations. Miniature job training involves training candidates to perform several of the job's tasks. Like work sampling, miniature job training and evaluation tests applicants with actual samples of the job, so it's inherently content relevant and valid. The training sessions serve two purposes. First, job candidates learn the actual skills they'll need to do on the job. Then, training sessions enable special assessors to scrutinize the trainee's work and rate them on it. Sometimes, a dose of realism makes the best screening tool. For example, when one organization began explicitly explaining and asking about work schedules and work preferences, turnover improved. Applicants who receive realistic previews are more likely to turn down job offers and select the right one. The employer should consider several things before choosing a particular selection tool. These include the tool's reliability and validity, its practicality in terms of utility analysis, applicant reactions, adverse impact, cost, and the tool's selection ratio. The bottom line is making sure that the tool screens out the right percentage of applicants and it admits the correct applicants into the selection process so you find the best person at the best time for the right job. One of the easiest ways to avoid hiring mistakes is to check a candidate's background thoroughly. Doing so is inexpensive and, if done right, useful. Most employers check and verify the job applicant's background information and references. There are two main reasons to check backgrounds: to verify the applicant's information, their name and so forth, and to uncover damaging information. Lying on one's application isn't unusual. How deeply will you search depends on the position. For example, a credit check is more important for hiring an accountant than a groundskeeper. It's important to pause here and recognize that it's not advisable to conduct credit checks in today's selection test reality. For more information on this, visit other courses in Greg Learning. In one poll, the Society for Human Resource Management found that 98% of 433 responding members said their organizations would verify dates of employment for current or former employees. However, 68% said they wouldn't discuss work performance, 82% said they wouldn't discuss character or personality, and 87% said they wouldn't disclose a disciplinary action. Many supervisors don't want to damage a former employee's chances for a job. Others might prefer giving an incompetent employee good reviews to get rid of them. Another reason is legal. Employers providing references generally can't be successfully sued for defamation unless the employee can show malice, that is, ill will, culpable recklessness, or disregard for the employee's rights. But many managers and organizations understandably still don't want the grief. It's easy to have employment screening services check out applicants. They use databases to access information about matters such as workers' compensation, credit histories, and conviction and driving records. Employers should use some caution with background checking services. Many states have ban-the-box laws prohibiting prospective employers from questioning applicants about convictions until late in the hiring process. Various federal and state laws govern how employers acquire and use applicants' and employees' background information. At the federal level, the Fair Credit Reporting Act is the main directive. Before requesting reports, the employer must disclose to the applicant or employee that a report will be requested and that the employee or applicant may receive a copy. The employer must certify to the background checking firm that the employer will comply with federal and state legal requirements. For example, that the employer obtained written consent from the employee or the applicant. Under federal law, the employer must provide copies of the report to the applicant or employee if adverse action, such as withdrawing a job offer, is contemplated. If the employer anticipates taking an adverse action, the employee or applicant must get an adverse action notice. The employee or applicant then has various remedies under the law. Finally, the criminal background information may be flawed. All of these factors should be taken into account when considering what to do in the selection process. There are steps one can take to improve the usefulness of background information. Specifically, include on the application form a statement for applicants to sign explicitly authorizing a background check. Remember that you can get relatively accurate information regarding dates of employment, eligibility for rehire, and job qualifications. It's more difficult to get other background information like reasons for leaving a previous job. Persistence and attentiveness to possible red flags improve results. If a former employer hesitates or seems to qualify their answers, try to unearth what the applicant did to make that employer pause. Compare the application to the resume. People tend to be more creative on their resumes than on their application forms where they must certify information. Try to ask open-ended questions to get the references to talk more about the candidate, but stick to the information that is specific and job-related and keep information confidential. Ask references supplied by the applicant to suggest other references. Then you begin getting information from references that may be more objective because they did not come directly from the applicant. A full picture requires contacting former supervisors, colleagues, and employers. A polygraph is a device that measures physiological changes. The assumption is that such changes reflect changes in emotional state that accompany lying. Doubts about the polygraph's accuracy culminated in the Employee Polygraph Protection Act of 1988. With a few exceptions, the law prohibits employers from conducting polygraph examinations of all job applicants and most employees. Local, state, and federal government employers can use polygraphs for selection screening, but state laws restrict many local and state governments. Private employers can only use testing under strictly limited circumstances. These include firms with national defense or security contracts and private businesses hiring private security personnel, hiring persons with access to drugs, or some doing ongoing investigations, such as a theft. Honesty tests are special types of personality tests designed to predict job applicants' propensities to dishonesty and other forms of counterproductivity. Graphology uses handwriting analysis to determine the writer's personality characteristics, moods, and even illnesses such as depression. It bears some resemblance to projective personality tests, although its validity is highly suspect. With or without testing, there's a lot a manager can do to screen out dishonest applicants or employees. Specifically, they can ask blunt questions. Says one expert, there's nothing wrong with asking the applicant direct questions such as, have you ever stolen anything from an employer? Listen carefully. Liars may try to answer direct questions somewhat evasively. For example, ask them if they've ever used drugs and they might say, I don't take drugs. Watch for tellable body signals, like someone who's not willing to tell the truth might move their body slightly away from you. Honesty testing requires caution. Failing what's fairly obvious in an honesty test may make a candidate feel mistreated. And some states, such as Massachusetts and Rhode Island, limit paper and pencil honesty testing altogether. Once an employer extends a job offer, a medical exam is often the next step in the selection process. Pre-employment medical exams help to verify that the applicant meets the job's physical requirements, to discover any medical limitations to consider in placement, and to establish a baseline for future worker compensation claims. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, an employer cannot reject someone with a disability if they're otherwise qualified and can perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation. The ADA permits a medical exam during the period between a job offer and commencement of work if such exams are standard practice for all applicants in that job category. Exams can also reduce absenteeism and accidents and detect communicable diseases. Most employers conduct drug screenings, and many applicants are flunking those tests. The most common practice is to test candidates just before they're formally hired. Many also test current employees where there's reason to believe they've been using drugs or after a work accident. Some organizations routinely administer drug tests on a random or periodic basis, while others require drug tests when they transfer or promote employees to new positions. Most employers that conduct such tests use urine sampling. Numerous vendors provide workplace drug testing services. Employers may use urine testing to test for illicit drugs, or breath or blood alcohol tests, and other various types of tests to detect these substances. It's more difficult recently to find applicants who can pass a drug test. As a result, more employers today are relaxing their standards about hiring those who fail tests, particularly for marijuana. No drug test is foolproof. Some urine sample tests can't distinguish between legal and illegal substances, as an example. Furthermore, there is a cottage industry offering products that purportedly help applicants pass these drug tests. Employers should choose the lab they engage in for testing with care. Unlike roadside breathalyzers for DUI drivers, tests for drugs show only whether drug residues are present. They do not indicate impairment or, for that matter, habituation or addiction. Many employers reasonably don't want drug-prone employees on their premises. Drug testing raises numerous legal issues for employers to consider. Employees may claim drug tests violate their rights to privacy. The National Labor Relations Board upheld a union member's right to have representation after failing a drug test. Courts require that employers who administer drug tests to employees who have accidents focus only on recent drug use. Several federal laws affect workplace drug testing, and multi-state employers must ensure that they also comply with state laws. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, a court would probably consider a former drug user who no longer uses illegal drugs and has successfully completed or is participating in a rehabilitation program as a qualified applicant with a disability. Under the Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988, federal contractors must maintain a workplace free from illegal drugs. While this doesn't require contracts to conduct drug testing or rehabilitate affected employees, many do. Under the U.S. Departments of Transportation workplace regulations, firms with over 50 eligible employees in transportation industries must conduct alcohol testing on workers with sensitive or safety-related jobs. Other laws, including the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and various state laws, protect rehabilitating drug users or those who have a physical or mental addiction. What should an employer do when a job candidate tests positive? As a rule, most companies won't hire such candidates, but current employees have more legal recourse. Most must be told the reason for dismissal if the reason is a positive drug test. Employees hired in the United States must prove that they're eligible to work here. The requirement to verify eligibility does not provide any basis to reject an applicant just because they're not a U.S. citizen, as long as that person can prove their identity and employment eligibility. To comply with this law, employers must follow procedures outlined in the so-called I-9 Employment Eligibility Verification Form. Recently, the federal government has been tightening its oversight of this administration and application of this form. Many employers are using the federal government's voluntarily electronic employment verification program, E-Verify. Federal contractors must use this free program. The I-9 forms contain prominent administrative notice. Applicants can prove their eligibility for employment in two ways. One is to show a document, such as a U.S. passport or alien registration card with photograph, that proves both identity and employment eligibility. The other is to show a document that proves the person's identity along with a second document showing their employment eligibility, such as a work permit. In any case, it's always advisable to get two forms of proof of identity. Undocumented workers stealing and using an authorized worker's identity is a problem even with E-Verify. Realizing that many documents are fakes, the government is putting the onus on employers to make sure they know whom they're hiring. You can verify Social Security numbers by calling the Social Security Administration.